Good morning, everybody. My name is Josh, and I would like to talk about something near and dear to me, which is environmentalism. I consider myself an environmentalist. I'm not an environmental activist. I have been to the Monsanto rallies. I do speak out against injustice and things I see around me that are harming the environment. I don't see it as a self-righteous or egotistical action. I see it as a necessity, something that we all need to do, to speak our minds about things that we see around us that we think are going to be damaging to the environment and to our future and our children and the animals and the trees and everything else. As I see the earth as an organism, I believe in the Gaian hypothesis, if you will, that the earth is a self-regulating unit that develops its own resistance to disease, to pests, whatever it may be. Now, as an environmental person, if you will, you might be surprised to hear that I am in support of nuclear power. Now, I can only imagine that turned a few smiles into frowns pretty quickly, and I'm sure I'll get some backlash from this, and that's fine. But I'm going to explain why I'm a proponent for nuclear power. Now, I've had this discussion in the past, and I've lost friends over it, not in a literal sense, but I've had friends on YouTube which were very strong advocates for eliminating all nuclear power. And I learned that if I even speak one iota of truth, one little bit of speculation about what if nuclear power is a way out, I instantly get attacked. And I'm not alone in this. I know that there are a lot of folks out there who have also done the research on fourth generation reactors and have a little bit more of an insight other than just the scaredy pants attitude about nuclear waste. And if you were to step into this and do your homework a little bit, you might see what I'm talking about. There are nuclear reactors that were designed after the Second World War were not designed for safety or efficiency. They were designed to produce power. And by the time we got to third generation reactors, which is the type that most of the world has right now, and I believe there are about 400 in operation, we end up with a lot of spent fuel rods, a lot of waste, and that we don't know what to do with. And in people's minds, this waste will be here for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's stored in these, facilities. The reality is that most of the nuclear waste is actually stored directly outside of the reactor itself. They put them in giant canisters, and they store it there. Now, here's something that most people aren't aware of. Now, up until recent years, there's one particular organization in Idaho which was working on the fourth generation reactors, which I believe was the low flow reactor. I can't remember the exact name of it. I'll try to put it up. The idea was that with this smaller, more convenient, compacted reactor, we were allowed to take spent fuel rods from old reactors and actually reuse them and recycle them in these new reactors. Not only that, but the U.S. over the past couple decades has bought, I think the number was 6,000 or 60,000 warheads from Russia. And we have a facility which we are dismantling these warheads and recycling them to use in nuclear reactors. Now, most people don't know this. So the actual nuclear process is helping to eliminate nuclear weapons in the world. Now, let's just take for a minute the idea of nuclear weapons. They're not going away, and the idea of how to make these weapons is not going away. So by eliminating nuclear power, there in no way are we going to eliminate nuclear weapons. But that's for a different story. This story is about reactors. This story is about the conflict of interest that we have in our future. Now I'm going all freestyle here. I don't have any notes, and I'm not cutting and putting this together. I'm not going to edit this video. This is just me talking, and I'm going to do the best I can. I have looked into the depth at which we have dug this hole that we're in right now with fossil fuels. And I've tried to see a way out of it. I've tried to see a way that we can get away from fossil fuels without using nuclear power. So if you're willing to go look at the pie charts on how much we actually use fossil fuels for, it's a majority of our energy, of course, we know this. Nuclear power is a very small amount of the actual energy that we use right now. Can't remember the percentage, but I believe it's 5 to 10% compared to most of the power that we use for our automobiles and for everything else. Nuclear energy can be rendered safe, but the public is so scared of it that we don't want to fund it. Now, this nuclear reactor that they designed in Idaho was very efficient, and here's what it did. This is the most important thing for people to know, because most people are scared of two things: waste and meltdown. With the fourth generation reactors, we're able to utilize a lot more of the waste. And not only that, but we take it down to where the actual radiation of the waste is only radioactive for a couple hundred years as opposed to thousands of years. Now that may sound like a long time to people, but if we've already figured out how to recycle this waste, who knows that if we put more time into it in the future, we might be able to figure this out. Now, before I go any further, I know that there's people out there who are saying, why would you support nuclear power when we have wind and when we have solar? Do your homework, people. Wind and solar both use gas. Wind and solar both use power. There has to be a way to transfer this energy, and solar panels are very highly toxic to make. But let's say for a minute that they were completely green and safe, and that we had found a way to manufacture solar products and wind products. Well, you're at the mercy of the solar and the wind. There's still going to be the winter time where you're going to need power. Nuclear power is consistent, and nuclear power can be rendered relatively safe. So what we have to look at is, do we want a small amount of radioactive waste? Which, let me tell you, if all the radioactive waste in the world was stacked up together, it would fill a football field 9 feet deep. That sounds like a lot, but that is nothing compared to the actual waste that carbon emissions create. If you took this entire football field full of waste and condensed it down to the actual highly radioactive plutonium grade, it would only go to the 1 yard line. It's a very, very small amount. And yes, we have to figure out how to deal with this. But the issue right now is that solar and wind cannot fill our needs. They're too expensive to implement, they're too expensive to utilize, and we still need backup power. We need reserves. People say we can store the energy in batteries. That's fine. Batteries are expensive and toxic to make as well. Well, we can make better batteries. Sure, we can, but they're heavy, they're awkward. The point being that right now, we're at a crossroads where we could take some of these more natural approaches like wind and solar and make them functional. The problem being that it's going to take about another 15-20 years for us to actually implement this to where the world would be able to utilize it. That's just the reality of it. But we have nuclear reactors that can operate now. Now, the U.S. government pulled funding from this program for these fourth generation reactors. And I saw an interview with the guy who actually ran the experiments on these reactors. Now what they did was they took this reactor and they basically pulled all the water out of it and put it into meltdown mode. And they let the thing melt down right there in the test facility. It got to a point where the levels had gotten really high, it got really hot, and then the level started to drop. They found a redundancy system that allowed them to keep a reactor from melting down. And we have this ability to do these things. But the public is so scared of radioactive waste because of the idea of what it is, because it's an invisible force that can harm us. It's an invisible force that can penetrate our bodies, and we believe it will damage our DNA. If you go look in the studies of places like Chernobyl, there are people and activists spreading so much nonsense about what it's done. They say it's killed millions of people, it's rendered all this land completely useless. So I watched a documentary the other day where the guy he brought his, his detector down there to the actual location. He went to Chernobyl and found that the background radiation there was 10 times less than it is on a beach in Brazil, just by natural background radiation within the soils of Brazil, which they've found absolutely no higher cancer rates from that as well. Now, it's obvious that a person who's exposed to a high amount of radiation can cause all types of cellular degeneration and problems. But even out of the thousands of workers that helped to clean up after that disaster, very few of them really had any major changes, and they really had no documented cases of birth defects. Now, a person could sit here and say, yeah, well, they're just spreading they're just lying, they're trying to cover their tracks so they can support nuclear power. Well, let me tell you something. Not a lot of people are in support of nuclear power, and if you think that the big wigs are in support of it, you are dreadfully wrong, because nuclear power is much cheaper than fossil fuels. There was an article put out in the 70s after Chernobyl that talked about all the horrific events and all the bad things that were happening and all the people that had died because of it. And the article said, go solar, go wind. Now, if you looked down at the bottom, it said that this message is brought to you by the oil and coal industry. So here we have the oil and coal industry telling us nuclear power is bad. Gee, go figure. And the people think that anything that they read is true. Well, nuclear power would put the oil and coal business out. And we know this to an extent. And I think that once people get a grasp on that and understand that they're not just being lied to by nuclear advocates, because the nuclear advocates know what they're talking about. They're being lied to by those who want to keep things going the way that they're going. And anytime there's a mass movement to hide the truth, people become suspicious of everyone. Now, we can look at this recent Fukushima event and use it as a perfect example of what can go wrong with nuclear waste. And one might say you're crazy to support nuclear power after Fukushima. Well, I've seen the radiation levels in Fukushima as well, and they're shockingly declining faster than they anticipated. But the problem with Fukushima is that it was a mass catastrophe on a third-generation reactor that was also damaged by a tsunami. And there was too much confusion over there to take care of the issue. The problem isn't what are the reactors like that have already melted down. The problem is how do we make reactors safe so they don't melt down? And we have that ability now. So since we have the ability to make reactors that can produce very little waste, and these reactors won't melt down, and these reactors also can take the waste that we have existing right now in stockpiles and reuse that waste, how can that be a bad thing? I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who will completely disagree with me, and that's fine. I feel like it's my duty to speak up about what I feel is right, not about what I want people to agree with. And so many environmentalists just assume that since they're an environmentalist, they have to be anti-nuclear. And these people are just totally uneducated on the subject. They don't know what they're talking about. I wouldn't like to see nuclear power implemented as our only source. I realize the danger of it. But I also see where we are right now. And at this point, if we were to go back 50 years and start over, wind and solar could have been implemented and utilized in place of nuclear power. So my question isn't, should we use nuclear power forever? No. We should get rid of it as soon as we can. However, for the time being, it might be the best transition into a different, better future before we destroy our own climate and ourselves and the world around us. I'm going to recommend a documentary. I'll put it in the comments section there, and I hope you'll watch it, because it kind of lays out exactly the way I feel since I read about nuclear power a decade ago. And I've been an advocate ever since. And I probably will. I wouldn't say I'm an advocate. I would just say I'm not opposed to it, to get ourselves out of what we're in right now. Peace and love, everybody.